mentioned about military readiness before and with the 24,000 leaving. And I recently saw a headline, and then you also just mentioned the technology and the organization not improving as fast as it should. So I saw one of the headlines when they were talking about removing those 24,000 positions as this is a way to prepare the military for the future of war and all that talk. But it doesn't seem as though that meshes with the actual organization and the technological advances that they aren't making, I guess.
Well, you don't have anybody in the Army right now, setting aside the whole organizational construct, which is still stuck in the Second World War. Setting that out, I've written books on that and got absolutely nowhere because nobody cared, frankly. So the generals are sort of fugitives from accountability because nobody cares. The problem is that the Army that you have right now can't go anywhere and do very much because armies need support structures. So, we'll pay some contractors to feed people. That's what's happening in Eastern Europe and Poland right now. Contractors are moving in and supporting things. Well, good luck with that the first time the rounds go off and the artillery bursts overhead and see how well those contractors perform. It's all nonsense. Same thing is true in the Navy. The fleet has to come into port to reload. The fleet, for ammunition. The fleet has to be replenished. It doesn't sit out there for very long before it needs food. It needs ammunition, it needs water, it needs repair parts. And so we set these things up. Right now, we have thousands of people in Israel preparing food and shipping it offshore to the naval forces in the Mediterranean. What do you do when you don't have that capability? What do you do when you lose that foot ashore? We're not thinking about anything. In fact, if I look at the distribution of forces all over the region, the Middle East and Eastern Europe right now, it strikes me that these are all little versions of Pearl Harbor. Most Americans don't understand that in 1941, when the fleet completed its annual Pacific exercises, it came into Pearl Harbor, and then historically what it did is it moved back to San Diego, Puget Sound, Portland, San Francisco. And FDR said, oh, no. Keep the fleet at Pearl Harbor. Well, the admirals almost came unglued. They still had men of character then in the senior ranks of the Navy. And the admiral said, we can't do this. And the CNO told President Roosevelt, if we do this, we're sitting targets. We're sitting ducks in the event that the Japanese decide to attack us. And he said, it will be a deterrent to the Japanese. They would never attack the fleet while it's there. Well, Marshall, who was the chief of staff of the Army, immediately convened a meeting with the chief of naval operations and said, we have to get ready for war. FDR just embargoed Japan. They're not getting any oil, tin, coal, none of the resources that they need to sustain themselves. So how long before we're at war with Japan? And now we're sitting here with a fleet that's could conceivably be sunk in harbor, and we still have thousands of troops in the Philippines, and we want to use the Navy to relieve the Philippines. Well, we all know how that turned out. 12,000 American soldiers went into captivity. So what was Roosevelt up to? I think he was up to a war, and we got a war. Everybody thinks, well, that was just great. Well, wars aren't very great. And we ended up at the end of that war in the middle of a lot of things that we didn't want to be part of. But the fact was, communism won the war. And so we had to stay in Germany, had to stay in Korea, had to stay all over the world to halt communism. Well, that went away. But all those places did not, and all the forces to provide this age-old notion of deterrence remained. The problem is today you have precision-guided munitions and missiles. Anything that sits forward as a target is going to go away. The biggest mistake you can make is to push everything forward so that it's a nice target array for your enemy. It's not a good way to do business. Is anybody talking like that? No. I don't hear anybody mentioning anything that makes sense on the military side.
No. In fact, this is, in the wake of the Gaza-Israel situation, we have had troops get attacked by the Houthis in particular because they're sitting ducks. They're out there. They don't need to be. So if you're Secretary of Defense, what is the first, besides firing a bunch of people, what is the first course of action for the military? Is it bring those people home, or what is it?
Well, first, you really do need to reduce the senior ranks. Right now, I think we have 43 or 44 4-stars for a force of a little over 1.1 million. And at the height of the Second World War in 1943, when we had 12.2 million men under arms, we had only 7 4-stars.
Wow.
Gosh, how could we have gotten anything right during World War II with only 7 4-stars? Today, we're blessed with 43. They're such a boon to the nation. Look, you've got to go after the overhead, and you've got to change our so-called national military strategy because it's focused on everything other than the United States.
Yeah.
We have to defend the Western Hemisphere, our hemisphere where we live. So you got to get the troops back, especially on the ground, and put them on our borders. It's not just Mexico right now. The Canadian border is wide open.
Yeah.
All sorts of drugs and criminals come in back and forth over and over and over again, from the Great Lakes all the way to the Pacific coast. So we have a huge problem. Then we have the criminality in our cities. Our police, what are we going to do for the police? Everybody I know who's an experienced policeman wants to leave. He's afraid to enforce the law for fear he's going to go to jail. So, the first thing you've got to do is you've got to cut the overhead. And you do that very simply. Good morning. Thank you for your interest in national defense. You're retired, effective, blum, you're gone. And meanwhile, your deputy will take over until further notice. And then you come out with a new structure. You need to chop away a lot of these commands. You need to reorganize the services. Those things have to happen. And that legislation has to be developed quickly and passed within the first few months of the administration. Then you're going to begin saving money. But the problem is Congress won't do it because there's too much money in this amorphous mass of bureaucratic confusion. The more 4-stars, the more services, the more headquarters, the more interests, the more money. And so if you go in there and you want to change these things, that's a huge threat to the incomes of everybody inside the Beltway and many of our defense industries and so forth. Now, the average soldier, sergeant, lieutenant, captain, is going to be very happy because then the focus is back where it belongs, on those people organized in formations that can deploy and fight, or on the people that actually man ships and do something. But we're a long way from that. So that has to happen. And that means a dramatic retirement of the problems, and then also a retreat or retrenchment is what is really the right word, a retrenchment that brings most of these forces overseas back to the United States. We know which bases are really important. I mean, if you went into the right room in the Pentagon and said, okay, there are 3,000 satellites up there, which ones are important? We know. Okay. Let's not kid ourselves. We know which are important and which are not. We don't need to abandon what's actually of vital strategic interest to us in terms of collecting information, intelligence, reconnaissance, and so forth. But right now, no one is doing anything, and no one will do anything.